Hi everyone. I'm going to be presenting about exploring open source methods for anomaly identification in agricultural fields. So just to introduce myself, I'm Monica. I'm a researcher at UWA, and my expertise is actually plant research, image analysis, and machine learning. And I just joined this project where we are going to develop models that can predict future weed locations based on diverse types of data sets like the farm management and environmental data and all these different things that can affect the emergence of weeds. And in this presentation, I'm actually just going to show a small part of it, which is just the detection of vegetation anomalies based on satellite data. So in this presentation, we are looking at 6 locations across Australia. So we have very different environmental conditions. These farmers will grow different crops. They are affected by different weeds. So we have a lot of variation in the data set. We're going to be using open source data and open source tools only to analyze this data. So everything is downloaded from Sentinel bi-weekly data from 2019, from 2024. Vegetation indexes, all the processing in Python, and then going to use k-means and special clustering to try to detect what are these vegetation anomalies based on the behavior of the pixels throughout this time that we downloaded the data. So these 2 methods are actually very similar, because k-means is it's a very popular method, and it's going to create this cluster based on the behavior of the pixels, and spectral clustering. It's also going to use k-means later, but uses an affinity matrix to try to identify the relationships between the pixels. So the first test that I did with these models and to try to identify the clustering was a historical cropping season groupings. So in this case, we have 4 locations only representative, and we are looking at the groupings of the behavior of pixels through only the cropping seasons from April to November in all these 5 years. So what we are looking here in the clusters is actually persistent groups within these fields. So we don't know exactly what the clusters represent, but we can see that these areas behave in a similar fashion throughout different years. In this comparison for the models, the k-means fits a little bit better to the data set. Spectral clustering actually crashed for 2 data sets, and they were not even that big data sets. So I think you might need either more processing or different models to be applied. One of the things that are more important for this is try to understand actually what affects the grouping and the performance of these models. Because I can get clusters through pretty much any images that you run through this kind of models. But I want to see clusters that might be more related to the detection of weeds. And one of the things that affects a lot of the clusterings that I'm obtaining from this analysis is actually the time. So if I do a multi-year analysis, I can see this more persistent groupings. But if I do a year by year, the farmers will grow different crops. So if I do a year-by-year analysis, I'm going to see different groupings. I don't know what they're related to. I don't know if it's just a crop or the soil, but I can see that they are behaving differently, and probably the weeds are also behaving differently and emerging at different times. So also within the same year, I'll have a variation of the vegetation in these areas. So if I look at the full year vegetation clustering that I have here, it's an aggregate for the full year, and the other one is just an NDVI running. And I can see there is difference in the NDVI, which are not fully captured in my clustering through the year. And this might affect, because I might have weeds that only emerge in the beginning. Other considerations that we'd have to have in this kind of analysis is that I might need a combination of VIs to be able to capture the weeds and all the variations and anomalies, which we can see in the first one, for example, NDVI was not able to separate this into clusters at all. I can just see different paddocks. Also complementary data sets such as yield records or the herbicide management and all different metadata associated with this is important. It might be able to help us understand a little bit more what are those clusterings, and also to ground truth this, because if you actually look at here, for example, we have this red dots, which is where we actually went into the field to see what is this little thing means, and try to identify if we had weeds and what kind of weeds we have growing there. Thank you.